that thanks to the love, support and sharing of the community that has followed us here on YouTube, we have been able to build a village for special needs children in crisis out in Tanzania. Our family in Tanzania is now made up of nearly 200 children. Most of these children have disabilities, and most of these children are among the most marginalised human beings in our human story. You have seen the suffering on this channel, I won't go over it, but these children had no access to housing, medical care, some were abandoned, and they certainly didn't get quality care, some of them. It is only thanks to the love, support and the partnership of persons in this community that we have been able to make this family a reality, that we have been able to bring these children out of the dark and into the light where they belong. To all who have partnered with what we do, thank you for your love and support. We simply can't do what we do without you. If you are not involved in our family and you are interested in helping us to eradicate this problem that we face inside the human story, eradicate this problem that these children are facing and don't need to face, then we have launched a new partnership program. If you visit www.sharetanzania.com/partnership, you will see all of the details there. Ultimately, these partnerships help us to sustain our family, to provide everything we need to these children to make sure they are happy. And in return with that, we will provide you with regular updates and a newsletter every month as well, so as you can see exactly how your act of love and sharing is impacting the world and the lives of these children in the same way that I get to. Are we God? It is fascinating that inside our species we have such a variance in consciousness. You have millions, perhaps billions, who go through a certain event in consciousness which leads them to say, I am God. You have the Hindu faith and the Brahman, which ultimately says that God, the Supreme Self, made a decision to separate and hide in individual lives, and we are those lives, and did so because what use was it to be of mere infinite awareness at all times? The adventure is why. And yet at the same time we have religions that are absolutely certain, rigid in their consciousness, that there is only one human being who could say that they were God, and this was Yeshua, or Jesus. Yeshua himself said in the Bible, "Is it not written that ye are gods?" Yeshua beyond there also said, "Whatever you do unto the least of these, you do unto me," which infers that there is such a presence of this being who claimed to be God, that when you do something to the least of a human, you do it directly to God. It also says in the Bible, those who are born of spirit will be the sons of God. And so what is going on? How can this be worked out? I went through a mystical experience in my life, and I struggled to give it the label experience. I struggle to give it that label because an experience is collected by a central point within us, and this, which I will speak of, was the greatest mystical experience of my life, for want of a better term. Lacked the presence of one to collect it. It didn't happen to something, someone. It didn't happen to a character, to a persona. This is how it feels in the memories I hold. And so I struggle with experience, for experiences happen to a center within our consciousness that we call self, and we collect these experiences. But I have gone through many supernatural and mystical occurrences in this world. I have seen the angelic. I have been healed by the angelic. I have seen the demonic. I, to this day, have been allowed by God to have a capacity to remove these negative forces and energies from people that we point at with the term demonic. I have seen prayers inexplicably answered. I have witnessed miracles. I have had out-of-body experiences where I interacted with beings that were benevolent and malevolent. And I did not pursue any of this. I just carried on following the way by which God had led me, which is in reflection of all that is happening in my life, the same way that Yeshua spoke of in his mother tongue of Aramaic when he called himself and the disciples followers of the way, for all that manifest in the perceptions of who I am, not from a book, but from pursuing this abandonment of self, is also referenced in the teachings of Yeshua, and so the two coincide. And for all I've gone through all of that, and I have memories of all of that, there is one mystical event which covers all of them and makes all of them seem kind of meaningless, for want of a better term. It was so powerful and so life-changing and carried with me to this day that all of those other events probably could not be without it. This mystical experience, as I say for want of a better term, I feel helps to answer this question. Why some feel we are God and why some are very certain that only Yeshua is God. Why others feel we are merely just created beings with an external God watching. During my 40-day water fast, at around about day 30, I had an event. Now I should say that what led this human organism sitting here talking to go into that water fast, and the reason I often use this term, this human organism, this soul within this human organism, is because of this event. This event, in my memories, was a participation in reality without a center. There was no me, there was no self to grab this, there was no self to get the experience, to collect an experience. It didn't happen to anyone. It was a remembering of something beyond that. And it is important to say that going into this fast, I was beyond hungry for change. I was desperate. I was desperate for the truth, for God. To the degree, due to the way I had lived my life, I have made it no secret. You know, if St. Francis said, I have been all things unholy. If God can work through me, he can work through anyone, and so it is here in front of you. I know how low as a man I can go, and I fight to never go there ever again, and believe I never will. But I had created such suffering in the world and in my own life and for others around me. I had behaved in such a hedonistic way. I had been involved in breaking the law, etc. I saw this way by which I was living, this me, this structure of a self that was controlling my life, as a problem. And I rejected every single fragment of it. I had had enough of it. I didn't know how to control it. I didn't know how to ensure that It didn't hurt others. It didn't make me suffer through its addictions, etc. It didn't make the soul inside this organism suffer. And so I went into this fast with a complete abandonment of self. The Englishman, John, all of the relationships, I abandoned them, going in and said, I'm willing to even die for the truth here. I just don't care for this structure, this being that I am, this person, separate person that I am. I don't care for it in its ways. I want something else. And so I went into this fast with that. And so this fast was truly not about a self going in and saying, God, give me this, as many do. God, I want this. It was purely, what is God's will for this organism and soul? Because the mind which holds the persona has no idea what it's doing anymore. And I was separated from that. And going into that fast, 30-something days in, having eaten 0 food for all of that time, I was profoundly weak. But at the same time, I was in a space where I felt peace in my heart. And I decided I wanted to go outside to get some air. And it was early morning, and there were some railway tracks right near the house that I was staying, and then after there was a forest and the ocean. And I crossed these railway tracks and I was weak, I was shaky, and I sat on a bench. And as I sat there, everything began to slow down, and the mind was completely without any label or thought, and I was returning, I felt the organism was returning itself back like a baby, like a child, to reality and its creator, and saying, I really don't know. I don't even know how to live this life. I don't know where I am. I don't know if what I have been told about who and what I am is true. I don't even know what the story is with the language that I'm using, whether or not it's beneficial or detrimental. I was like a child, innocent. I don't know. And everything slowed down, and I remember so vividly, the grass moving, tall grass moving very slowly. And I sat in this space, and I felt as if I felt as if the trees were growing, and I was witnessing that. And then I recognized that this movement of the grass, I could not distinguish the difference between what was moving it and what was moving the human organism that I was previously identified with as this structure of self in my mind. As I realized and witnessed that the trees are growing, I realized my hair is growing, my fingernails are growing, and I do not know any separation between the force that is growing the tree, moving the grass and the wind, and growing my fingernails. There was this movement into absolute unity. And I felt completely at one with everything, and I had no structure grabbing. There was no label saying that is grass, that is there was nothing labeling. There was no mind trying to store it as this is an experience that is happening to. It was a continuance of, and the continuance of was also this organism talking. This organism, this soul talking here, was a continuance of all of that. The grass moving, the trees growing, the ocean rolling in the distance, the sunshine. It was a continuance, a tumbling movement. That movement, I was a witness, a point of awareness, witnessing from within the tumble. And it happened to know self. And an elderly man came walking a dog. And as I saw this elderly man, I understood that this space of being a loving witness, whereby which I was witnessing all, including the life of the organism that I had believed I was so rigorously for so long, I realized that the loving witness was also in that man, and I felt this absolute unity with him. And we did not speak, but I understood the loving witness that is witnessing all things, including the organism, is the witness in that being also. And yet that being was moving through his life at that moment, I presumably unaware that he is that witness, for the mind was structuring a self to capture that essence of what I now recognize to be the pouring forth of the generous heart of God that gave forth for all creation infinite potential and free will. And in this space, I can't emphasize enough, there was no experiencer. And this is important, for people pursue awakening as if it will be an experience for the self to collect. And it's a complete impossibility. It's a dog chasing its tail. You can't be spiritually reborn if you are expecting it to be an experience of the self. The supernatural will not rise fully, for the self will condition. You see, in that space of unity, to come back to that moment where there was no experiencer to collect this, it's a memory I have of being there, tumbling in it all, it's never left. There, all that remained, and I say this loving witness, was the generous heart of God, generously pouring forth the opportunity for all creation, inclusive of the beings we are. And all that could be felt was love, elevated love and unity with everything I saw. I loved it all. I loved it all, and it would not matter, and it has not mattered when I have connected here again. When you meet a human being, who they are, what they have done, love is first. And this is the love clearly Yeshua spoke of and taught, and it's not a love you learn with the self, it's a love that you transform into with a rebirth. That love was the generous heart. And I recognize that the self, the structure in the mind, that it conditions that love. And the error comes that the love with which we have loved believe that somehow we generate, we own, and we pass was always beyond and deeper than all we are. The fabric of what we are and the animator of all things was a generous heart, which is love. And I recognize that the love with which we love is what we are, and we have believed we owned it with this structure, this center inside consciousness moving in the organism that we build and is needed. We take ownership of it, but the problem with that is we condition it. That self has conditions and traumas and beliefs, and so it conditions the love of God, which is not right. Our love should never be conditioned. Now, that voice in time, after moving through what I had to stay anchored in that presence, in that space, not that there was one to be anchored there, but to be anchored there was to have no center. It was to have no middle. And the Bible says you must die and Christ must be born. And I sense something along those lines is a way to point at this state of consciousness that awakening puts us into. And when I went to Africa, following the signs of this profound love, compassion and wisdom that was moving in my life in a new way. A new toolbox guiding life, no longer analysis and self, but a new toolbox. I met children, and I met some children out there in time, and we started the village, but deep into the work I met street children, street involved children. Children who were not only homeless but had been involved in drugs and rape, victims of, and the actual rapist as well. I met children who had murdered people. And when I met these children, they were the most difficult to love. The self, when you meet a very difficult being, really reacts. It really responds. It wants to make a center. That child is doing that to me, to this, but they are not. They are doing it like the wind blows. They are doing it because they are wounded and hurt. But the self really wanted to respond with, they're doing it to me. And I moved back to that space every day to the best of my ability to remember this love that knew no condition, where self was not reacting, for there was no self to collect and experience. There was something different in consciousness. It was a different space. And I watched these children heal. And it was there that I fully understood, whatever you do unto the least of these, you do unto me, that even as a rapist and a murderer, inside the core of those children was some dull spark of the presence of God, some divine soul essence that animates all of us and all creation. The generous heart was in them. And as they abused, it was in them. And as they were abused, it was in them. And whatever you do unto the least of these, as Yeshua said, you do unto me. I feel this is where people come to the conclusion they are God. I do not know what tomorrow holds. I do not know how my heart is beating. Clearly, something automatic is running that. I do not know where I go when I dream. I do not know how the body grew that is talking to you. But there is one that does, and biblically it's the one who knit you together in your mother's womb. And those who have a mystical experience in consciousness, when you find that generous heart pouring forth, if you find it through a shortcut, say a psychedelic, many come back and fall into the trap of saying, because it's from that space, that it's all acceptable in the eyes of God. And I tell you it's not. For when entering that space where I understood the generous heart of God, as you move away from that into creation, which had to have infinite potential and free will, you move into varying degrees of separation and arrogance. And we all wrestle arrogance. The arrogance can come even here. I am in a forest. I am looking at a tree. There's an arrogance to the self that says, I know what that is. It requires no further investigation, no deeper relationship, no further interaction. But the word is not the artifact. The word is not the thing. The symbol of the word can conjure much inside the self. But it is not necessarily the movement into this this arising from the generous heart that we have pointed at with the term forest. It is not you moving within it. It can shut you off from moving within it, and that's arrogance in itself. And so I know that humans have this awakening and say, therefore, hey, I'm God, because they sense this generous heart is in all things. But to the degree that the soul essence is a gift of life to all things, to that degree God is inside each and every one of us. And to that degree, whatever we did to the least of these children, young men who were rapists, I saw that even in those humans, that essence was there. And so when you help these children, you help God. And when you love these children, you love God. And it's a peculiar thing to say when you strip back away from separation, you are in the love of God. You are the love of God. And you bring that forward to love someone who is also the love of God, but due to the separation of the entanglement with the personal identity, due to the fact that the self in that person has not died and Christ being born, which is the love of God, that you must love them. And so we, to that degree, we are, of course, not the entirety of God by any measure. But God is inside of us. Woe unto the lawgivers, they take away the keys to the kingdom, for they do not enter within. When I moved into that space and consciousness, I was like a child. Unless you become as children, you may not enter the kingdom. Many will look for the kingdom and say, lo here, lo there, where is it? But kingdom is within you. The presence of God and the love of God is born when the organism is humbled to the point of accepting it does not know, and it is in a profound mystery. And there a self will build, for you must present a self to the world. But when I moved to there, it changed who I am forever. That love changed who I am forever. And it did not happen in the memory I hold to an experiencer, an observer. It was an absolute unity with it all. And to have unity with it all, there is not one to experience that. And that's the closest to God you will ever get. I believe. At least in this 3D world, in these bodies of ours. So remember that whatever you do unto the least of these, you do unto me. To that degree, the man who said he was the Son of God claims to be so present in the very least of a human that you directly do it to God. And to that degree, God is in you. And to that degree, we are holding in the organism the God essence, the I amness. And if that is not known, rebirth is a journey for some, and it must continue. Because it's the truth, and it brings the love. At least it did for this human sitting here.